Okay, so the first thing you're gonna do is you've got your panel that's 4 inches by 4 inches. It's got a simple grid on it. You're going to take your big brush, put a little bit of paint on the tip, and roughly sketch in your ornament. So if you look on the picture, you'll see kind of a rough outline is what you want to go for. Here's the top, here's the sides, here's where the bottom meets the table. You could do the shadow if you want to, but you don't really need to rough that in at this point. Just kind of the outline of the ornament. And then once you've got the outline, I like to do dark to light, thin to thick, big to small. So you're going to take your big brush and you're going to do the big shapes. So our ornament is red. You're going to mix up a red as close as you can to what you see. Our ornament's kind of a cool red. It's not a bright red, so you're going to mix some alizarin crimson, maybe a little bit of the cad red, and I always like to throw something in there to just neutralize it a little bit so it's not straight out of the tube. And in this case, what you'd use to neutralize red is its opposite, which is green. So you can take a tiny bit of blue and a tiny bit of yellow and add it to your red. And then you should be looking at the big shape, which is the top half. And I like to do the outline a tiny bit darker than the main color because it's further back in space. So you can add a little bit of blue to it to push it back a little bit. So add a little bit of blue to that red and you've got your outline color, okay? So you've got your sketch and you're just going to go over the outline in that kind of cool red in the top part. The bottom part's a little bit darker, so you could add a little bit of black, outline the bottom, and you've got the outline, should have a circle, a round circle, I guess. And then what I like to do is take that red that you mixed and you could cover the entire top half, or you could do some big strokes where you see that color. So you're going to see it kind of in the middle and along the back top. And you don't need to worry about the little things you see that are a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, because we're just looking at the big shapes right now. So if you had to lump all the color into a couple of big shapes, that top part is all red. So just put some strokes down, don't mess with it, call it good. All right, the next thing I like to do the shadow of the ornament, the shadow on the ball. So if you look at the bottom of the circle, it's the darkest down there. That's probably the darkest part of the whole painting. I don't like to use pure black because pure black is pretty flat. So if you want to, you can mix a little color into that black, which would be the color of your ornament, red. Or you can mix a very dark color by adding all the primaries, red, yellow, and blue together. So that dark color is going to be a big shape at the bottom. Those two almost touch. Once you've got that, you'll want to do the next biggest shape, which is probably going to be a lighter red along the bottom. So it's not quite as red and saturated as the top part, and it's not quite as dark as the bottom part. It's kind of in between. So you can mix those two together. You can mix a new color. But probably mixing those two together would be the best thing because that's going to be the most natural looking. So you got kind of a muted dark red, and that's going to go right above the darkest part on the bottom. Okay, after that, you've got 3 colors on there. the most saturated red, the darkest on the bottom, and then the color that's kind of in between. Now I want you to wipe your brush, wipe all that paint off of it, and now you can start to see, well, what's the next biggest shape after those three? It's probably going to be up on the top, a slightly lighter red, because the light is reflecting in the middle there. So you're going to try to mix that as best you can without using any white. I haven't given you any white yet because we're going to save that for last. So if you want to go lighter without using white, you can go yellow. You can add yellow. That'll make it a little bit more orangey. And if that looks too orangey to you, you can kind of tone down the color with a tiny bit of blue. So add that next biggest shape. And then there are a couple of, I would say, 3 or 4 other shapes that I would put in now. And they are the in-betweens. They're where the top meets the bottom half and where the light is reflecting on the top half. Put in a couple more shapes that you see. We're not going to look at the highlights yet, so a couple more shapes in there, and then we'll move on to the shadow. So after you've got the big shapes in there, there's about, let's say, 7 or 8 shapes of that ornament. And now we're going to go on to the shadow on the table. And the shadow on the table is dark, but it's not as dark as the bottom of the ornament. And it's got some of that red reflected on the table. The table is, I think, green in this case. So it's going to be a very neutral color. So you could go ahead and mix red and green together. And even blue. It's very cool. Try to get that dark color, but not quite as dark as the bottom of the ornament. It's okay if it's not exactly as dark as it is in the picture. What's more important is that within your painting, those values make sense. So as long as your shadow is not as dark as your darkest spot, if that makes sense. You just kind of want it to be a cohesive mini world there. Alright, so when I look at the shadow, I usually see about 3 or 4 values in there. It's the darkest part, it's the slightly dark part next to it, it's the lighter side coming from the left that it's getting a little bit more light. So kind of play around with the shadows. They're kind of tricky, and I like to keep them pretty simple. Just 3 or 4 shapes in there. Okay, once you got the shadow down, I like to do the table around it, and feel free to kind of go over the edges of the shadow to make it a little softer. You don't want a hard line right there. And I wouldn't scrub it, I would just lay your table color slightly over it. And look at that. If you like it, leave it. If you want it slightly more blurred, you could wipe your brush, add some more paint on it, put another stroke down, or you could wipe your brush and just kind of go over that line again and it'll soften it. There's a couple different ways you can do it. But try to work on the table. The table is using that big brush again. Using the big brush to go from the shadow back towards the behind the ornament, which is usually lighter and grayer because it's towards the light, but it's away from the eye. So remember, gray. So with the table, you want to keep it simple with big lines, about 2 or 3, actually 3 or 4 different color variations of the lightest part, the middle part around the shadow, and then the darkest, which is going to be on the right, away from the light. And after you got the table, notice where the table and the wall meet, at what point of the ornament. You want to do 2 or 3 colors, different colors, lightest, middle, dark of the wall to keep it interesting. So lightest again is on the left hand side, then middle, and then the darkest on the right. And you want those lines to be pretty sharp around your ornament. Try to go up to but not over. And if you do go over onto the ornament, don't worry, we can fix that. You can just go back over it with the red. But really take your time there. Let it be really intentional. And once you've gone around the ornament, you've got your wall, you've got your table, you've got your shadow, you can add the hook part next. So we're going to use a smaller brush for that, and it's pretty much a dark shape, a dark square with 2 or 3 lighter tones on top. So imagine that there's a shadow underneath it, then there's the metal bit, which is reflecting the light. So you'll see green in there, you'll see the wall color, which is kind of gray, and since we're doing that on top of the paint, it's really hard to go back and fix it up, so try to go really slowly on that part too.